Mr. Chairman, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for organizing this conference, and I'm glad to be here and to speak. Dr. Ephraim Snell already mentioned, and some others also mentioned, that today's attacks on Israel, attempts to delegitimize Israel, is part of new form of classical old anti-Semitism. And by the way, it's not something new, totally new, that anti-Semitism is hiding itself under the words of the struggle against Zionism. In fact, I grew in the Soviet Union, where each time when it was needed to launch another attack against Jews, the word Zionism was brought, because anti-Semitism by law was against the law. It was a crime. But to fight against anti-Semitism was a noble cause. And the massive purges against Jews were launched under the slogan of anti-Semitism. In fact, just now, listening to Dr. Ephraim Snell, it reminded me that many of Jews then were accused to be agents of Mikunis Sneh Zionist Banda. Well, young generation doesn't know that one day there was Communist Party in Israel which was divided on pro-Soviet, pro-Stalin Communist Party, I think Vilner was the head, and Communist Party which nevertheless was Zionist. And Mikunis and Sneh, the father of Ephraim, were the head. So each time when I think the leaders of this Zionist Communist Party in Israel could never imagine that they have so many agents in the Soviet Union, and these so-called agents had no idea about them or about Communist Party, and very vague idea about Israel itself. But they were persecuted as agents of Zionism. I would say that today's campaign of new anti-Semitism is more dangerous because sometimes it is launched not by the representatives of the dictatorial regimes, but sometimes it takes part in the centers of the free world. And many leaders of the free world, without realizing it, are giving hand to it. In fact, when I started participating as a member of the government in the end of the 90s and the beginning of this century in European conferences on the Holocaust and then against anti-Semitism, I found out that each time when you try to bring attacks on Israel as part of this anti-Semitic campaign, you always are told, wait, but that is legitimate criticism of Israel. Don't try to use the word anti-Semitism to justify legitimate criticism of Israel. And I felt that we really need to bring moral clarity, to bring clear distinction. Where ends legitimate criticism of Israel? And of course, Israel, as every democracy, is fully for its legitimate criticism. It cannot, no politician can survive one day in Israel without legitimate and sometimes less legitimate criticism of its own state. But where it turns into new anti-Semitism. And then I proposed this so-called 3D principle. I thought 3D is a good word because there are 3D films. If you look at the 3D film, you can never understand what's happening. But then you take these three-dimensional glasses, you put them, and suddenly the picture becomes clear. So I said, let's take the three fundamental principles of anti-Semitism: delegitimization, demonization, and double standard of Jews. And each time when we'll see that the same three principles are applied in criticism of Israel, the same principles which were applied to Jews in the same way as they were applied to Jews, we will know that that's the same old anti-Semitism, but applied differently. Demonization. Well, in all classical history of anti-Semitism, it all started from demonization. Jews very quickly, though in the early Christianity, Jews very quickly became the symbol of evil. And I tried to study in the past why it happened so. After all, Christianity was sect of Judaism. It was all Jews. When did it happen that Jews became the symbol of evil in Christianity? It happened because, in fact, already in Roman Empire and even the Greeks, Appian and the others, you could see that they were very anti-Semitic, that there was a lot of anti-Semitic feelings because Jews were different, because Jews were insisting to be different, because Jews were ready to integrate their gods with other gods. And so when Christianity came to Roman Empire and became part of their religion, it was very natural to have Jews as the center of evil. And then, of course, when definitions moved from religious to national, Jewish nation became in the center of evil, and blood libels, and poisoning wells, and so on and so on and so on. Sartre, summarizing the results of Shoah, was saying that for anti-Semite, there must be he doesn't need any explanations about Jew. Jew is the closest thing to evil. And that's it. That's Jew. So, okay, now we are in the modern era, and nobody will say that Israel is the next thing to evil. But then comes Nobel Prize winner, another Nobel Prize winner, not the one who was quoted before, and says, refugee camps, it's Auschwitz of today. I have to say, refugee camps is a very bad thing. And debate why 4 generations of Palestinians are kept, now it's 5 generations, kept in refugee camps is a very serious debate, which should be done, and we have nothing to be ashamed in debating this question. But I suspect that some of you were in refugee camps. I was in refugee camps from time to time. What it has to do with Auschwitz? That's a demonization not of refugee camp. That's a demonization of Israel, trying to say that Israel, that is the evil of today. There was Auschwitz then, there is Auschwitz now. In the middle of the 90s, there was in the middle of the Second Intifada, there was a cartoon in the Independence, in the English newspaper. Ariel Sharon, on this cartoon, eating Palestinian children. And the drops of blood are going out of his mouth straight on the earth. We protested. I, as a minister responsible for this, we appealed to the court, we protested that that's clear demonization. That's, look with what kind of images he's playing there. It's so clear there. And not only after this, the international forum of the European of the cartoonists gave the first prize to this cartoon. And then I was meeting with them, and they said it's absolutely legitimate. It's in the framework of our criticism of the policy of the State of Israel. And it was clear playing with these demonic images. Well, if somebody thinks that blood libel is something to the past, and of course it was very, you have to understand that this blood libel was very strongly built in the civilization. I met, as a young Jewish dissident, I met in the prison, I met with a young Christian dissident, and we became very friendly. And we were speaking very openly, we had the same enemies, we fought together and so on. But when we were speaking about the history and about blood libel, he told me very sincerely, well, he said, I understand that you and your friends and so on are not drinking the blood of Christians' babies. But maybe a few hundred years ago, there were rabbis who really were insisting that there must be a drop of blood there. And it's one of the most noble, enlightened, good-natured, positive persons with whom I became the closest friend. But in how deep it was in this consciousness, that definitely in this blood libel there is something. So if you think it's all belongs to the past, look at the modern blood libel. Israeli soldiers went to Haiti to help, and I was very proud. I was in America when on CNN there was unbelievable. I couldn't believe that that's CNN. Such a great report about how Israeli soldiers in Haiti are putting their hospitals, doing their work much quicker than Americans, better. And this journalist from CNN says in amazement, why we cannot do such a thing? It's so great. Then there is some, in one internet, there are so many sites on the internet, somebody writes that, in fact, Israeli soldiers are there, went to harvest the organs of agents in order to sell them, exactly as Israeli soldiers were doing it in Gaza. Okay, one stupid site against this great cover in CNN, what it can do? Then it goes to the other side, to the other side, to the other side. And then politician in Western Germany, thank God there is no Western Germany, politician in Germany from conservative parties raising the question. And then the woman from conservative, from liberal party in the United States, in England, is raising the question. And they say, we must have a special hearing. Of course, we understand not all Israeli soldiers, not everybody is harvesting organs, but definitely there must be some facts of Israelis harvesting the organs, otherwise from where it comes. And if you look today, if you make a poll all over globally, in Muslim world, in third world, in modern world, are there more people who believe that Israelis were harvesting organs or those who don't believe? I'm sure there will be quite a serious majority of those who believe that that's what Israel is doing. And that's typical example of modern blood libel, of modern way of demonizing Israel. And the world is playing with this. The legitimization, which is the topic here. Well, as a religion, it was delegitimized in many countries in the Middle Ages and before, as we know. As a nation, Soviet Union, Stalin wrote a special article that why Jews are not a nation. And that was the base of the fact that how they were explaining that they don't need Jewish schools, and then they didn't need even Yiddish schools, and then they didn't need Jewish culture because Jews are not a nation. Today nobody will say it, but it's interesting that our enemies always attack the base of our identity. When our base of our identity was religion, anti-Semitism was mainly religious. When the base of our identity was nation, the main emphasis was on the national anti-Semitism. Today, the base of identity for more and more Jews is Israel. So Israel becomes illegitimate. And in fact, it's interesting. Just now, Ephraim mentioned something which is I can agree, but it's legitimate. He said, I believe that settlements are illegitimate. I disagree. I think there is a difference between legitimate settlements, non-legitimate settlements, but it's not the question now. The question is why Israel is the only country in the world which the question of legitimacy is raised, even if it is in the context of illegitimate settlements. Think for a moment that Iraq, which is more artificial creation than Israel, because it was simply Britain decided that they need such a country, and Putin said Shia, Sunnis, and Kurds will live here inside it. And then Kurds are fighting for their legitimacy to be one people. 30 million Kurds between Syria, Turkey, and Iraq are fighting to be the right people. They are not getting it. Is there anybody in the world who says that Iraq is a legitimate country as long as it doesn't recognize the rights of Kurds? Nobody will even think about it. And the same about Saudi Arabia, which was absolute artificial creation in the beginning of the 20th century, and when it was fighting to conquer Yemen, and it was unfair. And everybody agrees that it was fair. Somebody said that Saudi Arabia has no legitimate right to exist if it will really conquer Yemen. And I'm not saying what Cambodia did to its people, what China did to Tibet, and so on. I don't want to compare. I simply want to say that the only country in the world about which again and again is said, by our friends, not only by our enemies, by our friends, that it has to prove its legitimacy, that if it doesn't do this or do this, maybe it will be legitimate. That is delegitimization. The legitimization which is done not intentionally, but it is as if it is accepted. What to do? Israel is the last sin of colonialism, so we have to be very sensitive to it. That's how many intellectuals in the West think. And of course, this big debate about Jewish democratic state. What is the problem for the free world to recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish democratic state? Because we have the law of return. You know, Germany has, without saying it, has very powerful law of return, much more powerful than ours. When the Soviet Union fell apart, they came immediately there and said, everybody who has any German ancestors can automatically get citizenship. And nobody said that there is something non-democratic in this. Here there is a state which says we were created in order Jews can gather, so we have our law of return. And then suddenly there are many articles, one after another, and step by step supported by more and more intellectuals, leading intellectuals, some of them intellectuals in Israel, who say that that's illegal. You have to be the state for all the citizens. And you know when in Aqaba, Abu Mazen, Ehud Olmert, President Bush met, and when Ehud Olmert gave his proposals, very generous, some like me would say too generous. And then President Bush, I know, he was absolutely sure that Abu Mazen will accept it immediately. Because Ehud Olmert said, for all this, I ask you one thing. Say now clearly that you recognize Jewish democratic state. And President Bush was surprised when Abu Mazen said, no, I'm not going to do it. Because to recognize Jewish democratic Jewish state, it means to betray all those who are in the refugee camps and so on. It must be the state for all the citizens. So one can say, how Abu Mazen can have such a chutzpah when he just now got practically everything that he could dream of, and he's asked only to recognize Jewish state, he's not recognizing. And I tell you why. Because he knows that the free world is, many people in the free world will understand him. As you know, in Europe, for many governments today in Europe, it's a big problem to recognize Jewish democratic state. And that's our struggle for legitimacy. And the third point, I'll try to be very short, double standard. Maybe the most powerful point, a classical anti-Semitic approach. In Russia, I had a special book, very rare book. I got it from a bookinistic shop. The laws of Romanian Empire about Jews. It's 300 years, 1,056 laws, where it is mentioned why Jews have to pay different taxes, why they have different rights to study, different rights to live, where they can live, where they cannot live, and so on. So it's official double standard. Of course, which today cannot be used officially after Holocaust and so on. But then the Soviet Union was using it non-officially. Now, Israel, nobody in the modern world, of course, will say something about double standard towards Israel. But let's take example. There was very important international convention in 1949 on how the countries are treating their prisoners of war. Very important convention. In our times, after all these atrocities in Germany and Japan, the world said we must have clear laws that after this we can send people on Nuremberg or other trials for treating the prisoners. So 160 countries became the members of this convention. This convention, for all these years, convened full convention only once, to condemn Israel for treating prisoners of war. And, of course, today we could see another picture how our soldiers have beaten some anarchists from Denmark, I think, and we can see other. But you don't have to be historian to compare the way how we treated our prisoners of war, how Hamas is treating, how Hezbollah, how Syria was treating prisoners of war, how Egypt was treating, how all the world was treating prisoners of war. And the only country which international body condemned for violating this convention was Israel. There must be double standard. There is no other explanation. And when you start asking explanations, they'll say, well, but we couldn't do this because Russia didn't agree and we couldn't do this. China didn't agree. Here is the only country on which everybody agreed to condemn. And the same, which is mentioned very often, that there was Committee on Human Rights in the United Nations, now this not conference, another committee on the human rights, a council on human rights here. They decided, their first decision was that there will be only one permanent topic. Every topic every year will be discussed, but one permanent topic which goes from one year to the other is situation with Palestinians, how Israel is treating Palestinians. The biggest violation of human rights, only think what's happening in Muslim world, all over the world, there is only one permanent point on the agenda. I'm meeting with the commission in those years, it was like 7 years ago, and I asked how you could accept that. She is outstanding Canadian lawyer, she feels uncomfortable with this. How you accept that that is the only permanent issue? What about Chechnya at that moment? What about Sudan? Why they are not permanent issues? And she said, but I agree with you, but what can I do? There was agreement between Russia and its allies and Africa that they are not raising Chechnya and they are not raising Sudan. So no, there can be logical explanation. But Solzhenitsyn wrote a book, like 1,000 pages, 200 years together, where he is trying to explain logically why these laws, special laws of Tsarist regime about Jews were justified, that it wasn't anti-Semitism. And there is a lot of logic to this. But the moment you accept this logic, you accept the fact that for hundreds of years, the treatment of Jews in Russia had to be different. You cannot accept, you understand it's anti-Semitism. So the same I say here, it doesn't matter how you explain this. But the very fact that as a result, bottom line, the world can agree about condemning only one country for violating human rights, and that's Israel, which is by far, well, I don't want him to start comparing our record on human rights with everybody else in our region today, especially it's so easy. That shows this unbelievable double standard. But first of all, you have to recognize it. The problem is that when you're coming on the campus, and I spent time on 70 different campuses, these are the real battle for the heart of Jewish people. Young Jews feel very embarrassed, ashamed. They speak, why? Because they say, well, but how we can defend this disproportional response? 13 Jews are killed against 1,000 Palestinians killed. How we can explain this and this? And then you start, okay, let's put in the context of modern world. Let's speak about disproportional response of American troops in Iraq. And you can, it happened to be just in those days, if you remember, when two sons of Hussein were killed by American bombarding. Killed after third attempt. On every attempt, another restaurant and another cinema was destroyed. So hundreds of innocent people were killed in order to target these two real awful villains, awful criminals. I saw no discussion in American press then what about these hundreds of people who were killed. So you're bringing this and you're saying, isn't it double standard? And then it's much easier to speak. The problem is, first of all, you must put clear criteria and to make the free will to accept them. And the fact that we are like ourselves are ashamed to call it anti-Semitism, to call it by its name. Of course, in the United Nations, it's not an anti-Semitism because what to do? Russia made a deal with African countries, and that's why we are excluded. It's as purely anti-Semitism as in Tsarist Russia, there was special law about the Jews. And now in the United Nations, there is special law about Israel. If we will not recognize it as a modern anti-Semitism, if we will not build the big alliance of people, thanks God, there are so many people who believe that that is anti-Semitism, and we will not connect it into the struggle of all the enlightened world against anti-Semitism, we lose. And that's a very important battle, not only because that I'm concerned about security of Israel. I am not concerned because security of Israel in the end is defined by by our strength. But I am concerned about this connection. Now here I speak also as the head of Jewish Agency. When I see how our enemies succeed to disconnect the whole new generation of young, proud, liberal Jews, and how they try to convince them that if you're a liberal Jew, you cannot be connected to Israel. And that's our real battle. And because we have nothing to be ashamed, and because we know very well that all these attempts of double standard, of demonization, legitimization of Israel is classical anti-Semitism, which is a big danger for the world. We have to fight it on our terms, and I'm sure we can win. Thank you.